Right then, hello everyone. My name's Stephen Grinnell from Energy Medicine and Interex Pain Clinic. And tonight we're going to be talking about plantar fasciitis and most importantly, walking. We covered quite a lot of ground last week, looking at standing, looking at how you put pressure on the structure of the foot, how that works. So a quick little recap. So the key thing is obviously looking at trying to keep your feet nice and square. Obviously, you can do an offset if you've got plantar fasciitis in one foot, and we did a lot of stuff about altering the pressure and the load on putting onto the toes so that you stood up using your better foot. I have spoke to two or three people this week where they've had plantar fasciitis in both, which then poses some additional problems. So key thing, obviously looking at your feet being nice and square. And what we're going to focus on with walking is having your feet slightly further apart. Now, we talked a little bit about standing position and other bits and stuff last time, but the key thing with walking is to have your feet slightly further apart than you normally would. So you're looking at having a gap of around 9 inches, maybe a little bit more. So it depends on how you walk normally. And the reason for that is it'll obviously change the weight as it comes through. So your body weight. When I talk about body weight, it's important to rationalize that as force. It's not anything else. So walking with plantar fasciitis invariably is painful, and it's the main reason that people come to see me is that the pain gets progressively worse. So rather than walking further, people walk shorter. So you do less distance. You might nip around the shops, short distances around the house, garden, that type of thing. But anything further is challenging. And what you tend to find, like with initial standing, pain's worse first thing in the morning, then it calms down a little bit. And if you're at work and you've got tasks on, it tends to distract a little bit. So walking's less of an issue. The other thing is, unfortunately, if you're anything like me, when you're working, you don't do loads of steps. You're not hitting thousands and thousands of steps. You work in a relatively small environment. And I tend to be tied to a sort of treatment space in the clinic or the computer. So I don't tend to do a lot of walking in between. So any steps that I do, I have to proactively add those in. Now, you tend to also find that when you stand up, and we've talked about this a lot last week, obviously then you can have a quite an high increase in pain. And if you've been doing some of the things that we talked about last time, that will reduce some of that initial pain sort of element. When you start walking, those first few steps, obviously all your muscles go very, very tense. Now, what happens is that the muscles are trying to support the foot and trying to support the fascia so that you don't have any pain. So obviously by walking, you're mentally overcoming that as an issue. So what's happening with your foot is rather than it being nice and flat, because we've got all these muscles in, which we looked at before, all those muscles go into spasm. So they all actually contract. You don't want them to contract like that because obviously your foot now is in a different position for walking than it would be normally. So when it contracts and it's in spasm, the muscles, instead of contracting all the way and then relaxing, are actually half and half. That then causes more problems because the foot can't work properly because of the muscles. And also, it means that it's putting more pressure on the base part of the fascia. And obviously, the pain then increases in the heel. As you start walking, so people tend to find they stand up, the first few steps are really uncomfortable, and then things do ease a little bit, so the intensity drops off. Not always, but for most people, there's a level of reduction. That's because the muscles have gone from this position and they relax slightly, so they take some of the pressure off. And that's why some of the pain then reduces and enables you to maneuver around. Obviously, like we've talked about before, lots of people have to modify in what they do. So the other thing is that if, like me, you might be on a computer, you might be working, you might do an hour, a couple of hours, you could be just sitting, reading, watching TV, any sort of activity where you're in rest mode. And we talked a lot about the nerves and everything shutting down for your lower body. As soon as you stand up, obviously you have a big change and everything increases. And then as soon as you start walking, what you've got to remember is your body has been healing that part of tissue and it's also relaxed, so it's not being used, the muscles aren't contracted. So as soon as you start walking, you're putting a lot of pressure on very, very quickly. And your foot is what they call a second class lever, which means it's designed for power, not for speed, like most of your body is. So when it's designed for power, it means that you can lift a very, very high load without actually putting lots of effort in. The best way to describe that is looking at a wheelbarrow. So when you pick a wheelbarrow up at the back, that's your Achilles tendon. You've got all your body weight coming down the middle, so it's all going through your ankle, through your heel. And then you've got the ball of your foot. The front part of your foot is your wheelbarrow. And we've talked a lot about foot position. And as you lift up, your body obviously lifts up, and then you push off, and you can generate a lot of force like that. So you can jump and you can land. And there's a lot of structures that work in that sort of place. So where do we start with walking with plantar fasciitis? This will sound very counterintuitive, but the most important way to start is to actually really start looking at when you walk to put your heel down first. Now that is, as I said, counterintuitive. When we were looking at standing, we were looking at putting our toe down to take the pressure off the heel, that initial strike. What we're looking at with walking is to put our heels down, so our heel down first. Now, the reason for that is so that the muscles of your foot can relax and have a start position. So all of the muscles of your foot are in this position when you start walking, which is where they should be, because you're on your heel. So that's a bone. So you're on your heel, all your muscles are all relaxed. As you bring your foot down flat, obviously the muscles then help with balance and support and everything else. So they start to contract. And then as you push off, so you bend your ankle, push off with your toes, all the muscles then contract to support the foot so that you can move forwards. Okay, so those things happen in that sort of way. So as a process, that's what should happen. So when you put your heel down, all the muscles of your foot should be relatively relaxed. As your body weight transfers over and your foot's flat on the floor, you've got some muscles working because they're acting as stability and balance. And then as you push off, more of the muscles contract to help with pushing forwards. So that would also explain why things like insoles, which we talked about, obviously aren't going to work as well when you have that heel down. Obviously, there's no support, so they're not giving any support. But the muscles, because they've got an insole and it's all being pushed up, they can't relax properly, so they can't get into their natural position. You then put your foot down flat, best position for an insole. And then as you come up onto your toes and you're bending your toes, obviously, again, there's no support, but the muscles can't contract properly because the insole is stopping that happening. So the key thing to do with walking is to look at feet nice and straight, slightly further apart, and then you want to practice taking a short stride, no more than about 15 inches, so that sort of distance. So it's quite short. So you take a short stride, but you emphasize landing on your heel. Now that's not putting your heel down hard, that's just bringing your foot forwards and making sure the first thing that hits the floor is your heel. So your feet slightly further apart. First thing that hits the floor is your heel. You then have your weight transfer. Next one, heel down, heel down, heel down, and heel down. Now that's quite an easy process to follow. It makes you think really, really hard. So everybody that I work with, as soon as they do that, it feels like they're trying to solve a maths equation because it's really different to how you walk. And what I'm emphasizing is a short stride. And the reason for the short stride is that as you step, your body weight is only going to be roughly half. So you're half the amount of force because you've got one on the supporting leg, so half your body weight on your supporting leg. As you bring your heel forwards, you're only putting a maximum of around half your body weight as force onto your heel. So it's reducing that force element. So it's less painful, a little bit like when we were standing on our toes. So it's taking that pressure off the heel. You then obviously transfer your body weight and then you swap, swap, and swap. The other thing to look at then is that's going forwards. That's great. That's a great exercise. It's a great maneuver. Brain-wise, you'll feel that it's totally wrong because that's the part of your foot that hurts. Once you've done 4 or 5 steps going forwards, and it depends on how big the space is that we're talking about, but work on 4 or 5 steps. You've got to the point, you stop. So your feet are in that position. You've done 4 or 5 steps forward. What I want you to do now is to then look at walking backwards. But it's walking backwards and stepping back only again about 12 to 15 inches, so quite a short distance, but you're emphasizing putting your ball of your foot, your toe down first. So when you step backwards, your foot is in that position. You then lower it and then you repeat the process with your other foot. So you put your toes down, so your ball of your foot's down on the floor. You put that first and then lower it down. So it's a slow movement. It's not quick. It's slow and it's really, really deliberate. And you take those 4 or 5 steps backwards. You then repeat the process. So you walk forwards, then walk backwards. Now, what that does is it relaxes all of the muscles of your feet so they start working in the right sequence. And the reason for walking backwards is you put no force going through your foot. So it allows the muscles to contract, but they're not being used to push you forwards because you're going backwards. So you're using gravity, you're not using your body to push yourself forwards. So the load on your foot drops massively, something about 30%. So it's really, really small. So obviously that allows you to reset all of your muscles. So what you'll find when you practice this, I'm going to send some links so that you've got some video so you can see this a little bit more in action. But when you watch it and do it, what you'll find is it'll feel a bit tentative walking forward, short steps, feet in this sort of position, heel down, heel down, heel down. When you walk backwards and you really emphasize putting your toes down, what you'll find then is that your foot actually feels better and better and better. So it's a way of calming some of the pain down, and it makes a big difference. And it's something I recommend people do first thing in the morning. So you've got up, you've stood up in this particular way, you start taking these steps, and it's important to walk forwards and backwards just to take all that pressure off and allow all the muscles to reset. The other thing is, and I do lots of stuff where I say, have a cup of tea first thing in the morning, it's to practice walking forwards and walking backwards in the kitchen, kettle on, 2 or 3 steps forwards, 2 or 3 steps back. Short strides, 12 to 15 centimetres. Now, I always crack the same joke. And make sure you do this inside because you look a little crazy doing this sort of stuff outside, and it puts a lot more pressure on. But you'll find that once you've done it 2 or 3 times, your brain suddenly feels like this is really, really hard because it's so different to what you've been doing walking your whole life, because suddenly you're looking at emphasizing certain things as you're walking. Now, what you've got to look at then is, okay, these other things that you've seen. So we've got this idea of putting your heel down, weight transfer, pushing off, and we've got this idea of walking forwards and backwards. Now, the reason that's important is that what's actually happening when you're walking, we're trying to get your ankle to work a little bit more. Now, you will have seen on the internet, if you've done any searches on YouTube, loads of stretches for the back part of your ankle. So this tendon here and the muscle at the back of your leg, which you've talked about, and it's to stretch this, which allows you to take the pressure off. The other thing you'll have seen is lots of things, balls, rollers, all sorts, to relax the muscles of your feet. So you've got devices to help with this and lots of stretches to help with stretching your Achilles tendon. Now, your Achilles tendon is phenomenally strong. So if you ever go to an abattoir, they hang up carcasses of cows basically by their Achilles, one Achilles. So you imagine the weight of a cow and it's on one Achilles. So it's the strongest tendon in the body. So therefore it's the hardest to stretch because it has so much force that can go through it. Now, I last week bashed some of the sort of things, and I've just done it again now, insoles and rollers and all the other stuff. One of the things that you can buy on the internet, which I recommend anyone with plantar fasciitis to buy, is one of these, a foot rocker. Okay, again, I'll send you links so that you know where to get them from. They're available on Amazon. They're not expensive. So you put your foot on. Okay, again, I'll show you a link with the video so that you can see more detail. But the idea is that you put your heel on this point, your foot on the front, and you basically rock your foot backwards and forwards. Okay, now if you look at the instructions in the packet, it tells you to do that standing up. If you do it standing up, it's way too much force, so it absolutely kills your foot because it's too much pressure. The same as if you've been doing stretches that you've seen on the internet, the pressure's too high. It's not that those stretches are all completely wrong, they're just at the wrong sequence. So the sort of thing that you would do when your fascia's nearly healed, so you put it under a bit more pressure and you can stretch a little bit more. But initially you want to keep the load low, but you want to do lots of repetitions. So what I get people to do is use one of these, pop your foot on, but I get you to sit down, so you're not standing on it, you're sitting down on a chair, you put your foot on, and all you do is roll your foot forwards, roll your foot back, roll your foot forwards, roll your foot back. And what that's obviously doing is working your ankle. It's got very little pressure, so it's not hard, it's very easy to do. And the key thing is to go as far forward as you can and as far back as you can. Not to push, just to go far forward, far back. nice and easy. Now, what you'll find is as you do 2 or 3 movements backwards and forwards, you'll start getting the roller and the rocker, and it will start moving around because your foot's not used to being dead square, dead straight. So all the muscles are used to doing different things as you walk and move. And what it's doing is it's mimicking that walking technique. So it's obviously heel strike, heel down, foot weight transfer, toe off, heel strike, weight transfer, push off. So all of those things it's mimicking. So it's getting your ankle used to that movement. Now, as you're moving it up and down, as I said, stuff will move out. So it's important that you correct it so that it's nice and square. When you sit down, you want to have your leg at 90 degrees. So you want to sit quite a firm chair, kitchen chair or a dining chair, pop that underneath your foot and obviously rock. Now, I recommend around 5 minutes, but also on the foot that doesn't hurt so that your ankles get used to this heel toe movement. But it's your ankles, not your feet. And what you'll notice is that your toes start raising up more as you push down. So as you try and lift your foot up, your toes are artificially bending up higher, not your ankle, because your ankle's not used to doing the movement. Now you'll notice that I mentioned 5 minutes. 5 minutes is a long time. So it's important that you have a little timer, forwards and backwards. You haven't got to go fast, but you'll find that that 5 minutes, once you've done it 2 or 3 evenings, it will get better and better and better. So you'll be able to go up to sort of 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And I find a lot of people use this most evenings and they find it quite therapeutic, particularly if you've been busy in the day, you've been, say, doing a bit of extra walking, been moving around, or if you're struggling within the day, it's a really good movement to do to sit down and it just takes all the pressure off your ankle and your foot. So it's actually really proactive as a movement. There's progressions that you can do using this, but the key thing is to look initially at getting your ankle to relax and rock and move in the right sort of way. Now, when you think about your ankle moving, that allows you to do this movement, heel down, weight transfer, then push off. So what we're looking at then is saying, okay, so we're getting you to walk forwards and backwards. So that's going to get the movement, and we've got a foot rocker. That's great. And you talked about 4 or 5 steps. So for most people, that's going to be around your kitchen, around your lounge. So it's very, very short distances. So I'm talking about that as a starting point to practice. Now, depending on how painful your plantar fasciitis is, that might be where you need to start, but that's quite an extreme case. Most people can, I say, potter around the house, but go around the house reasonably okay. And they can probably go around the shops or short distances, say from a car to the shops or to work, and then move around the office, that type of thing. When you start looking a little bit further, and we're not looking at much further, we're looking at 3 minutes, 6 minutes, 9 minutes, suddenly that's getting quite far because you can cover quite a lot of distance. So what I set people is a walking exercise. Now, again, depending on how you feel, how painful it is, that either starts at 3 minutes, 6 minutes, or 9 minutes. But if we start at 3 minutes, that means that you need to practice this walking, short strides, heel down, short strides, okay, all the way for 90 seconds, so it's a minute and a half. Stop, turn around and walk back to where you started. So it's a very, very short, focused walk. What you're looking at initially is looking at getting your heels to go down so that you've got a little bit of a rhythm and it feels a bit more natural. You're looking where you're going, you're thinking about how you're moving, your body's more upright, all of these sorts of things, but short strides. 3 minutes, 90 seconds one way, 90 seconds the other. Once you can do that, the next stage is to go to 6 minutes. Now, bear in mind, I've mentioned this a lot, magnitude of improvement. If you're doing 3 minutes, turning around and then doing 3 minutes, that's double the distance, double the time. So the intensity is obviously quite significantly different. So that while it's only an extra few minutes, it's actually 100% more. So if you're struggling walking, 3 minutes, 100% more than 0. And obviously then if you're doing 6 minutes, it's 100% again. If you then go on to 9 minutes, again, that's 4.5 minutes in one direction, 4.5 minutes in another. Straight away, then you're up to another 50% improvement. But I would look at having a go at doing 3 minutes, then 6, then 9, and just gradually improve that way rather than rushing on quite, it's not too bad. I'll have a go at doing 9 minutes. because 9 minutes of concentration is again a long time. And what you've got to think about is we're looking very much at walking technique. Now that helps in another way because it helps us distraction because you're focusing on doing something. So you're looking and saying, okay, right, I'm thinking about this. I've got my feet in a certain position. I can't step too far. I've got to have my feet a little bit further apart. All of those things you're thinking about, but only for a minute and a half, turn around, a minute and a half. The other thing is, if it gets painful, you need to stop. Lots of people say to me, oh, well, I tried and I can only do 2 minutes. That's fine. You've got to start somewhere. You've got to find your baseline. I give 3 minutes because it's a reasonable amount of time. And also mentally, that's quite a long time, 90 seconds to focus on all the things that I've just mentioned. And we're only looking at that first phase. The next phase, obviously, is to look at doing the last bit of walking, which is the push-off bit. So obviously we've talked a lot about this bit where you're on that position. And what we've got to talk now about is this bit, so the push-off piece. And the way that I get you to do that is once you can do around 6 minutes to 9 minutes, it's starting to look then at the push-off piece. So what you do is you gradually lengthen your stride. So that puts a little bit more pressure on the heel when you put your foot down. So the percentage force and body weight goes up, but it also allows you to push off a little bit more. So you're pushing more with your toes and using all the muscles of your foot in the right way, and also your ankle movement, your Achilles tendon. But the key thing to remember is that if you do 9 minutes focused walking, and say you did that twice a day, straight away, you've got quite a decent distance. That's half a mile, 9 minutes at a reasonable pace, 3 miles an hour. So it's not rocket pace, but it's quite quick. But straight away, that's 20 minutes in a day. You do that over a week, that's lots of repetition, lots of movement, but it's really thinking about the steps. So every time you set off, it's thinking about, right, I'm going to put my heel down, weight transfer, then push off. And I'm looking at doing short strides. Okay, so we talked about short strides, we've talked about doing things for a time limit, and we've talked then about modification. So we said, right, we've got to have our feet in this position, we've got to get heel toe and everything else. The final phase is actually slowing your step down, but it's getting you to do your normal stride length, which invariably will be quite long, and that's relative to how tall you are. So the way that you do that is you slow everything down. So as you step forwards, you take as much time as you can to put your heel down. And as you're doing that, you want to take the longest strides you can. Now, I call these puddle steps. So like you're stepping over puddles, as opposed to doing short strides, which we started off focusing. Then we stretch them out as you got a bit more comfortable. We're now doing quite a long, accentuated stride, but we're slowing everything down. Again, keeping things within this 3, 6, and 9 minutes, but we're taking a longer stride, but it's slow, which means you spend more time on your supporting foot. And that focuses your body to balance more on your foot here and here because you're taking a long stride. And what that does is it works on the final part of your walking cycle. So the first thing we looked at, heel strike. We then looked at lengthening the stride to make you start to use your toes a bit more. The last part is what I call puddle steps, where you're taking a lot longer stride, but you're slowing everything down. And the whole point is for you to be focusing and thinking about the actual walking movement. So it's something that you need to either do with someone or on your own, but the focus is all about the technique, not about speed, not about the distance or anything else. It's your technique. First part, short strides, heel square, sorry, feet square, heels. Next phase, 3, 6, and 9. Next phase is looking at slightly longer strides, and that's starting to push with your toes. Again for 3, 6, and 9. Final phase, long strides, but you're slowing everything down. Now, the distance and how far you cover in the time isn't important. It will be different for all sorts of people for lots of different reasons, whether it's height, fitness, frequency, all of these things. It won't make any difference. It's all proportional to you. So the key thing is you've got 3 phases to look at with walking: short strides, intermediate, longer strides. And the focus initially is on heel strike, and the final focus is on the push off, the push at the end. Now, those three elements, are you walking correctly? And the reason that I've stressed that you do it in that sequence is that it puts the least amount of pressure on your foot. Because bear in mind, we want the heel, this part here, to heal. The muscles can help support that. We're going to be using this every day so that you can rock your foot, so you get used to that heel toe movement, but more importantly, your ankle does, which means all the supportive structures around your ankle. If you look at the model here, you'll see that there's loads of supportive bands, there's lots of muscles, you've got 26 bones. All of those things get used to working in a nice square, straight position. Now, when you look at all of that as a package, that's quite a nice little progressive thing. So I've got short things to do first. So I've got 3 phases and 3 different time zones. So 3, 6, and 9 in time. And then I've got 3 different transitions: short steps, intermediate steps, long steps. Focus initially is on heels. Focus at the end is slow steps, longer ones, and pushing off from your toes. Now, those elements will work and they'll be different for different people. So they work really, really well. So it takes time, obviously, for the pain to come down. And I talk a lot about doing short strides, heels, and that phase might take a week. It might take 2 weeks before you can go to the next stage, to the stage afterwards. It isn't literally a rocket machine. It doesn't suddenly get better. But what it does do is allow you to walk further and further and further. So 3 minutes, 6 minutes, 9 minutes. Bear in mind, 9 minutes, if you think about it, is getting on for quite a fair distance from a walking speed, time, all of that stuff. It's about half a mile. So that's quite a far distance, but probably quite a lot further than you can walk currently if your plantar fasciitis is quite bad. And what you're trying to do is alter all the movements so that you're not aggravating the fascia and what your body's trying to do to heal it, because you're walking more correctly. Now, you probably find that you'll have walked in some form. Everyone comes, I need to walk heel toe. So everybody knows that that's what they need to do. But when you were a child, you weren't taught how to do it. And the reason for that is you were going to be 1, 2 years old when you learned to walk. So the conversation was very much about moving your feet and balance. So you would literally put your foot forward, you're off balance, your other foot forward, you're off balance. So you were constantly regaining balance. Most people have a foot that's slightly turned out, which we talked about before. And obviously that helps with stabilization. And then that was it, you were off. The other thing that's interesting is you were probably also in bare feet or had like little socks or something on. You weren't having necessarily shoes or supportive stuff. And you certainly didn't have any of these. So the key thing is that you learn to walk in bare feet. You walk differently in bare feet than you do in shoes. So the last thing to think about is an acid test for this is the thing that I've said about doing in the house: short steps, walking forwards. Have a little go in your normal footwear, but also have a go in bare feet. And that will give you a really good acid test for how things are improving and the speed of improvement. Because if you can do things in bare feet and you can do 3 minutes walking, well, let's have a little go at this in bare feet. Oh, that feels okay. I can now push to 6 minutes to 9 minutes. Bear in mind that if you're doing a couple of sessions of 9 minutes over 5 to 7 days, that's a lot of walking, but it's really, really focused, because you've got to change the habit of a lifetime. And more importantly, you've got to change it when you've had to compensate for pain. Now, I would say probably 90% of the people I see compensate quite severely for their plantar fasciitis. And most people walk from their hips. So they tend to walk in a shuffle movement and don't really use their knees and ankles properly, because they tend to, like most people, myself included, if you're walking socially, you're walking around the shops, you go in somewhere, unless it's raining, nobody's in a rush. So everyone tends to walk at quite a slow pace, and you tend to get distracted, stuff's around you. I was in Broadway at the weekend and you wander around, and obviously you're walking around shops and sort of looking at buildings and all the other bits. So no one's in a rush. It isn't like you're sort of purposely walking like you would if you were on a trek or you were walking quickly somewhere. So that's the normal pace that we're used to walking. If you haven't got any foot problems, that's nice and easy. It doesn't impact. The only time people are engaged in seeing me is If they've got an injury, so they've got to change how they walk because of an injury, which is why people are here, or if they want to improve in a particular sport or an activity, and then they see a coach to look at running or some of the sort of specific styles for what they want to do. So you've got 3 minutes, 6 minutes, 9 minutes, and three different phases of things to try. Now, what I'm going to do is after we finish the live and the questions, it's about then saying, okay, I've got about 4 or 5 links I'll send you so that you can have a look at, right, okay, that's interesting. I quite like the walking. Can I have another little look at that? I've got a short video on it, a video for the rocker, a video for all the little bits, insoles and how they work and how they relate to your feet. So all of these things will be sort of more evident and easier to visualize after the event. So has anyone got any questions on walking and plantar fasciitis right now?
Well, thank you.
Hello, Leslie. Did you have a question?
No, thank you. No, I'm fine.
You're all sorted. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Very
No,
good.
so what I'm going to do is at the end of the session, so I'll put a recording and stuff on so other people can see if they've not seen it, and there'll be 3 or 4 links for you to have a look at. And they'll also have a video, but also then information underneath, so some text explanation and stuff as well. And there'll be links for getting things like foot rockers and other pieces and stuff as well. So thanks very much for tuning in. And as I said, all the links and stuff will come out in email. So I will see you next week. We'll be looking at quite a lot of stuff next week, quite diverse, looking at habits, changing practice, all sorts of stuff, and then different movements to do different activities. So thanks very much for tuning in, and I will see people next week.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.